Wheelchair-bound cleaner dances with the boss's daughter. But when he finds out, Richard Thompson had built his fortune with steel and concrete. Every penny earned through sweat and determination after losing everything in his youth. Now, at 42, he owned one of the largest construction companies in New York City and a mansion in Beverly Hills that was his pride and joy. That Thursday afternoon, he decided to leave the office early to retrieve some important documents he had forgotten at home. As he entered through the front door, he heard classical music coming from the living room. His steps faltered when he heard joyful laughter echoing down the hallway. It had been 6 months since he hired Grace Williams as the cleaner, a decision he made only at the insistence of Sarah, his personal assistant, who claimed it was impossible to find someone more dedicated. As he approached the living room entrance, Richard froze completely. His 7-year-old daughter Emma was twirling hand in hand with the cleaner, who moved her wheelchair in gentle circles to the music. The two were singing a children's melody in harmonious voices, completely absorbed in the joy of the moment. Emma wore her favorite pink dress, while Grace, with her curly hair tied in a bun, smiled in a way Richard had never noticed before. Anger surged like volcanic lava through the businessman's chest. How dare this employee touch his daughter? Emma was all he had left in the world after Jennifer, his wife, had passed away 2 years earlier. The girl was his most precious legacy, and there she was, being influenced by a maid. "What's going on here?" Richard shouted, making both of them stop immediately. Emma ran toward Grace, hugging her waist as if to protect her from something threatening. "Daddy, don't yell at Aunt Grace. She's my best friend," the girl said, tears welling in her bright eyes. "Emma, come here right now," Richard ordered, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard," Grace said, gently trying to ease Emma away. "I was just cleaning the room, and the music was playing. Miss Emma asked to play for a little while. I don't want explanations. I want you to stay away from my daughter immediately." Richard pointed his finger at the woman. "You were hired to clean, not to play." Emma began to cry loudly, clinging even tighter to Grace's beige blouse. "But Daddy, Aunt Grace teaches the most beautiful dances. She used to dance at Lincoln Center and tells amazing stories about ballerinas." Richard felt his blood boil. What did she mean, used to dance at Lincoln Center? He knew nothing about this employee's past. What else was she hiding? "Emma, go to your room." "Now," he said, trying to control his tone. "No, I just want to stay with Aunt Grace." "Sweetheart, it's going to be okay," Grace murmured, stroking the girl's blonde hair. "Go to your daddy. He loves you so much." "Promise you won't leave?" Emma asked, looking into Grace's almond-shaped eyes. "I promise I'll always care about you deeply," Grace replied, avoiding a promise she might not be able to keep. Richard picked up Emma, even as she kicked and screamed, and carried her to her room, leaving her in the care of the housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, a woman in her 60s who had worked for the family for decades. When he returned to the living room, Grace had already put away the cleaning supplies and was waiting silently. "I want to make this perfectly clear," Richard said, standing in front of the wheelchair. "You were hired to clean this house. Not to be my daughter's friend, not to tell her stories, and certainly not to dance with her. If this happens again, you're fired. Understood?" "I understand, Mr. Richard," replied Grace, her voice soft but firm. "It won't happen again. I hope not. My daughter needs discipline, not fantasies." Grace nodded and headed to the service area, pushing her chair with precise movements. Richard was left alone in the living room, listening to Emma's muffled sobs from upstairs. That evening, Emma refused to eat dinner. Mrs. Jenkins tried to convince her to at least have some fruit, but the girl turned her face away every time someone approached with food. "What's wrong with her?" Richard asked the housekeeper when he came down for dinner. "She's been like this since you sent her to her room. All she does is ask for Grace," Mrs. Jenkins replied, with a tired sigh. "She'll forget. It's just a child's tantrum." "With all due respect, Mr. Richard, it doesn't seem like a tantrum to me. The girl has been different these past few months, happier, more talkative. Even her grades at school have improved." Richard stopped cutting his steak and looked at the housekeeper. "What do you mean improved?" "Her teacher called last week to praise Emma's progress in math and English. She said Emma has been more engaged in class and puts more effort into her assignments. Richard hadn't heard about the call. Sarah, his assistant, usually screened all calls from the school, but apparently this one had gone straight to Mrs. Jenkins. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I thought you knew. The teacher said it was obvious Emma was getting extra help at home." Richard finished dinner in silence, processing the information. Emma had always struggled in school, especially after her mother left. He had even considered hiring a tutor, but never found the time to arrange it. The next morning, Emma woke up with dark circles under her eyes and refused breakfast. Richard had an important meeting and couldn't be late, but the image of his daughter's red-rimmed eyes stayed with him the whole way to the office. Grace arrived promptly at 8, as always. She wore her favorite beige blouse and had her hair tied back neatly. She greeted Mrs. Jenkins politely and went about her daily tasks, starting with cleaning the downstairs bathrooms. Emma woke around 9 and rushed downstairs looking for Grace. When she found her in the guest bathroom, her eyes lit up. "Aunt Grace, I knew you hadn't left." "Good morning, Emma," Grace said, pausing her cleaning. "How did you sleep?" "Badly. I was scared you'd leave and never come back." Grace's heart ached. In the 6 months she'd worked in that house, she'd grown genuinely fond of the girl. Emma was smart, sensitive, and starved for attention. She reminded Grace of herself as a child, when she'd lost her mother early and was raised by her grandmother. "Emma, I can't play with you anymore," Grace said, choosing her words carefully. "Your father doesn't like it, and I have to work." "But why? We have so much fun, and you promised to teach me that swan dance." "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes adults have rules children don't understand." Emma was silent for a few moments, processing the words. "Is it because you use a wheelchair?" she asked, with the innocence of a child. The question took Grace by surprise. In all those months, Emma had never treated the wheelchair as something different or limiting. "Why do you think that?" "Because at school, some kids' parents won't let them play with me. Madison's mom said I'm weird because I don't have a mom. Maybe Daddy thinks you're weird because of the chair." Grace felt her eyes well up. Emma's ability to connect situations and understand people was remarkable for a 7-year-old. "It's not about that, my love. Your father just wants what's best for you." "Then why does he get so angry when he sees us together?" Before Grace could answer, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Jenkins appeared at the bathroom door. "Emma, come have breakfast. And Grace, Mr. Richard called saying he's bringing some clients for lunch today. He wants the house spotless." Emma left reluctantly, looking back several times before disappearing into the kitchen. Grace spent the rest of the morning preparing the house for Richard's guests. She cleaned every room with extra care, arranged the flowers in the dining room vases, and made sure there wasn't a single stray hair in the bathrooms. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Around noon, Richard arrived with 3 men in suits. Grace recognized one of them from the business magazines she sometimes flipped through in the doctor's waiting room. It was Michael Anderson, owner of one of the largest supermarket chains in the state. "My home is modest, but I hope you enjoy lunch," Richard said, leading the guests through the living room toward the dining area. "Modest? Richard, this mansion is a palace," Michael laughed, admiring the paintings on the walls. During lunch, the men discussed a new business venture. Richard proposed building a shopping center in an upscale area of the Upper East Side and needed his partner's investment to make the project viable. "The return is guaranteed within 3 years at most," Richard explained, showing blueprints and projections on his tablet. Just then, Emma appeared at the dining room entrance. She had slipped away from Mrs. Jenkins and came downstairs looking for Grace. "Daddy, where's Aunt Grace?" the girl asked, unaware she was interrupting an important meeting. Richard's face flushed with embarrassment. "Emma, go back to your room. I'm in a meeting." "But I want to talk to Aunt Grace. She disappeared." "Who's Grace?" Michael asked, smiling at the girl. "She's my best friend. She dances with me and tells me beautiful stories about ballerinas." Richard quickly stood up, trying to guide Emma out of the room. "Excuse me, my daughter's a bit excitable today." "Not at all, Richard," said another partner, Robert Wilson. "She's adorable, And who's this Grace she's so fond of? She's an employee, Richard replied, clearly uncomfortable. Emma managed to slip away from her father and ran toward the service area. "Aunt Grace! Aunt Grace!" she called out as she went. The partners exchanged amused glances. Michael, who had grandchildren Emma's age, was curious about this employee who had won the girl's heart so completely. "She must be someone special for your daughter to adore her like that," he remarked. Richard forced a smile. Emma gets attached to people easily. A few minutes later, Emma came running back, but this time she wasn't alone. She held Grace's hand, who pushed her wheelchair with the other, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard," Grace said. "She insisted I come." "Look, Uncle," Emma said to Michael, who was closest. "This is Aunt Grace. She dances even sitting down and teaches me amazing moves." Michael stood and greeted Grace with a warm handshake. "Nice to meet you, Grace. From how excited this little one is, you must be very special." "The pleasure is mine, sir," Grace replied, trying to maintain formality. "Aunt Grace, show them that beautiful spin you taught me," Emma pleaded, clapping her hands. "Emma, that's enough," Richard said, his voice tight. "Grace, you may return to your duties." "Hold on a moment, Richard," interjected Robert. "I'm curious to see this dance your daughter keeps talking about." "There's no need," Richard tried to shut it down. "Please, Aunt Grace, just a little bit," Emma begged. Grace looked at Richard, who was clearly irritated, then at the other men, who seemed genuinely interested. Emma held her hand with such anticipation that she couldn't bring herself to refuse. "Well, maybe just a simple movement," she finally said. Emma rushed to turn on the music, playing a soft classical piece. Grace positioned her chair in the center of the room and began moving her arms gracefully, coordinating the motions with small turns of the wheelchair. Emma danced beside her, mimicking the gestures with the natural grace of children. The three partners fell silent, struck by the beauty and fluidity of the movements. Michael especially seemed moved. "That's beautiful," he murmured. "Absolutely beautiful." When the music ended, everyone applauded, except Richard, who remained with his arms crossed. "Grace, do you have training in dance?" Robert asked. "I do, sir. Before my accident, I was a ballerina and a classical dance instructor." "And what happened?" Michael wanted to know. Grace hesitated, glancing quickly at Richard. "It was a car accident 3 years ago. I've used a wheelchair ever since." "But you didn't stop dancing," Michael observed. "That's admirable. Dance is part of who I am. I just had to adapt to a new way of expressing myself." Emma moved closer to Grace and hugged her around the waist. "I love when Aunt Grace dances. She says everyone can dance, each in their own way." Michael stepped closer to Richard and whispered in his ear, "You have a treasure here, my friend. This woman isn't just an employee. She's a born educator." Richard nodded mechanically, but inside he was boiling with anger. How dare Grace put on a show like that in front of his important partners? Worse still, how could Emma disrespect him that way, disobeying his clear instructions? "Well, I think we've taken up enough time," Richard said, signaling the end of the demonstration. "Grace, thank you. You may return to work." "Of course, Mr. Thompson." Grace politely bid farewell to the partners and left the room, taking Emma with her after the girl blew kisses to everyone. "Richard, you never told me you had such a talented educator at home," Robert remarked when they were alone. "As I said, she's just a cleaning lady." "But with that background, why not use her as a private dance teacher for Emma?" Michael suggested. "My granddaughter takes dance lessons, and I can assure you we've never found anyone with that level of sensitivity and technique." Richard quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation back to the shopping center project's numbers. But for the rest of the meeting, his mind was torn between profit charts and the image of Emma dancing joyfully with Grace. When the partners left, Richard went up to his home office and closed the door. He needed to process everything that had happened. For 6 months, Grace had worked in his home as nothing more than an efficient, discreet housekeeper. He'd never imagined she had such refined training, or that she'd developed such a close bond with Emma. The truth was, Richard felt threatened. Since Jennifer left, he'd worked hard to be both father and mother to Emma, but he knew he couldn't fully fill the void left by his wife. Seeing Emma so attached to another woman stirred a primal fear in him the fear of being replaced. And then there was Grace's wheelchair, which unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't conscious prejudice, but a discomfort that made him avoid looking directly at her. Perhaps it was fear of his own vulnerability, since Richard had always been someone who associated success with physical and mental perfection. That evening during dinner, Emma barely touched her food. "Daddy, why were you mad at Aunt Grace today?" she asked, absent-mindedly stirring her rice and beans. "I wasn't mad. I just made it clear she has a job to do. But our uncles loved her dancing. Why didn't you?" Richard set down his fork and looked at his daughter. Emma had her mother's bright eyes and the same knack for asking direct, uncomfortable questions. "Emma, you need to understand that Grace isn't our friend. She's an employee. There's a difference." "What difference?" "Employees are paid to do a job. Friends like us without getting money for it." Emma grew thoughtful for a few seconds. "But Aunt Grace plays with me even when she's not cleaning, and she never asked for money to teach me dance." Richard grew irritated by his daughter's flawless logic. "Even so, I don't want you bothering her during work anymore." "I don't bother her. She likes playing with me." "Emma, that's enough. This discussion is over." The girl began to cry silently, letting tears fall onto her plate. "I just wish you liked Aunt Grace as much as I do." Those words struck Richard like a dagger. Emma wasn't just asking to play with an employee. She was asking him to accept someone who had become important in her life. The next day, Richard decided to come home early to observe the interaction between Emma and Grace. He wanted to understand better what was happening so he could make a final decision about the situation. He parked in the garage and entered through the back door, passing the kitchen quietly. Mrs. Jenkins was preparing dinner and didn't see him go by. He headed toward the living room, where he heard soft voices coming from the library. Approaching carefully, he saw Emma sitting on the floor surrounded by books, while Grace helped her with what looked like homework. "So, when we add 8 and 5, how do we do it?" Grace asked patiently. "I count on my fingers," Emma replied, holding up her hands. "Exactly. But we can also use other ways. Look, if you have 8 dancers on stage and 5 more arrive, how many are dancing together?" Emma closed her eyes, picturing the scene. 13 dancers. Perfect. See how much easier it is when we imagine things we love. Richard watched for a few more minutes, seeing how Grace turned every math exercise into an engaging story. Emma was completely focused, asking questions and showing an interest in learning he'd never seen before. "Aunt Grace, can I tell you a secret?" Emma asked, lowering her voice. "Of course, sweetheart. Sometimes I pretend you're my mom, not to replace Mommy Jennifer, but like I could have 2 moms, one who lives in heaven and one who dances with me." Grace felt her eyes fill with tears. "That's so beautiful, Emma. Your mom must be so proud of the special girl you are. Do you think she'd like you?" "I'm sure she would. Mothers always want good people to care for their children." Richard stepped away quietly, filled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was moved by the tenderness of the scene. On the other, he felt excluded from the closeness between Emma and Grace. Later, as Grace was packing her cleaning supplies to leave, Richard approached her in the laundry room. "Grace, we need to talk." "Yes, Mr. Richard. Do you have any education beyond dance?" Grace hesitated before answering. "I have a degree in education and a specialization in child psychology." Richard was stunned. Why had she omitted this information when she was hired? "Why didn't you mention this before?" "Because I was applying for a cleaning position, not a teaching one. I thought my background might be seen as a negative, as if I wouldn't be satisfied with cleaning work." "And are you satisfied?" "Any honest work satisfies me, Mr. Richard. After my accident, many doors closed. When I got this opportunity, I just wanted to do my best." Richard fell silent, processing the revelation. Grace wasn't just a cleaner who played with Emma. She was a qualified educator who had taken a lower job out of necessity. "Have you been helping Emma with her homework?" "Sometimes she asks for help when she's struggling." "I never wanted to interfere or make decisions that belong to you. And why didn't you tell me? I thought you might misunderstand, as if I were trying to overstep without permission." Richard realized he had created an environment where Grace felt the need to hide her qualities for fear of being misjudged. Emma's grades have improved a lot these past few months. She's a very bright girl. She just needed someone to explain things in a way that made sense to her. And the dance. How did you start teaching her that? Emma saw me exercising my arms one day and got curious. She asked if I could show her some moves. I thought it would be a lovely way to help her express herself. Richard realized he had misinterpreted all the interactions between Grace and Emma. What he saw as boundary crossing was actually a dedicated educator giving her best to a child who needed attention and care. Grace, I need to think about all this. I understand, Mr. Richard. If you prefer, I can stick to just cleaning. I don't want to cause trouble. It's not that, it's just complicated. Grace nodded and excused herself, leaving Richard alone with his tangled thoughts. That night, Richard struggled to sleep. He got up several times to check on Emma, who slept peacefully hugging a stuffed bear Jennifer had given her years ago. Watching his daughter's angelic face, Richard remembered how she had been before Grace arrived. Emma spent most of her time alone, playing with expensive toys but without other children's company. She rarely smiled and had developed a habit of throwing tantrums whenever she didn't get immediate attention. Over the past few months, she had become more talkative, happier, and even more affectionate with him. At breakfast, she told stories about ballerinas she'd learned from Grace. In the evenings, she showed him drawings inspired by their impromptu dance lessons. Richard realized he had been selfish. His discomfort was depriving Emma of something that clearly made her happy and helped her grow. The next morning, he resolved to act. He arrived at the office determined to discuss the situation with Sarah, his assistant. "Sarah, do you remember Grace, the cleaner you recommended?" "Of course, Mr. Richard. Is she causing any trouble?" "Not exactly. I found out she has degrees in education and child psychology." Sarah smiled. "I knew that. That's exactly why I recommended her." Richard was surprised. "What do you mean? You never mentioned her qualifications when you suggested her." "Because I knew how resistant you are to change, especially when it comes to Emma. I thought if Grace started as a cleaner and proved her worth, you might see her qualities naturally. So you set this all up." "I didn't set up anything. I just created an opportunity for two special people to meet. Emma needed someone like Grace, and Grace needed a chance to start over." Richard leaned back in his chair, realizing he'd been subtly manipulated by his own assistant. "How did you meet Grace?" "She used to teach dance to my niece before the accident. After she ended up in a wheelchair, the school where she worked let her go, saying she couldn't perform her duties properly anymore." "And then?" "Then she spent 2 years looking for work. No one wanted to hire someone in a wheelchair, even with all her qualifications. When I found out you were looking for a cleaner, I thought it could be an opportunity for both of you." Richard fell silent, processing the information. Grace had taken a job far below her qualifications just to make ends meet. "And what do you think I should do?" "You should follow your heart. Emma hasn't been this happy in months, and from what I see, Grace has also found a new purpose in life taking care of her." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard spent the rest of the day thinking about his conversation with Sarah. For the first time in 2 years, he admitted to himself that maybe he couldn't be everything Emma needed. Working 14-hour days to maintain the lifestyle he'd built left little time to be the present father he wanted to be. When he got home that afternoon, he found Emma throwing a tantrum in the kitchen. Mrs. Jenkins was trying to convince her to eat some fruit, but the girl was visibly upset. "What's going on?" Richard asked. "Emma's been like this since she got back from school," Mrs. Jenkins explained. "Seems like something happened there." Richard knelt in front of his daughter. "Emma, tell Daddy what happened." The girl burst into tears. "The boys in my class said I'm weird because I don't have a mum, and because my friend uses a wheelchair." Richard felt a sharp pang in his chest. Emma was being bullied at school over 2 things she had no control over: losing her mother and her friendship with Grace. "And what did you say to them?" "I told them Aunt Grace is the coolest person ever and that they're dumb." Then they laughed even more and said people in wheelchairs are weird. Richard hugged Emma. feeling all her anger and sadness in her small arms. "Sweetheart, you know that's not true, right? Grace isn't weird. She's a wonderful person who's been through hard times." "I know, Daddy, but it hurt when they said that. And you were right to stand up for your friend. That shows you have a good heart." Emma stopped crying and looked at her father in surprise. "You're not mad at Aunt Grace anymore?" Richard sighed deeply. "No, sweetheart. In fact, I think I was wrong. So can she come play with me again? We'll talk to her tomorrow, okay?" Emma smiled for the first time in days and hugged her father tightly. That night, Richard called Sarah and asked her to arrange a meeting with Grace for the next day. He had a proposal to make, but first, he needed to settle some things with himself. On Saturday morning, Grace arrived as agreed. She wore a light pink blouse and had pinned her hair back with a delicate headband. Richard noticed she'd dressed up specially for the conversation. Emma was at swim school, so they could talk privately. "Grace, first of all, I want to apologize," Richard began as soon as they sat in the living room. "Apologize for what, Mr. Richard?" "For not recognizing your qualities from the start. Sarah told me about your background and the challenges you faced after the accident." Grace lowered her eyes. "I didn't want you to know about that. I don't like people feeling sorry for me." "It's not pity, Grace. It's admiration. You took a difficult situation and turned it into something positive. And more than that, you changed my daughter's life. Emma is a special girl. Anyone would grow attached to her. But not everyone would have the sensitivity and knowledge to help her the way you did. Her grades have improved, her behavior has completely changed, and she's happier than I've seen her since her mother passed." Grace smiled timidly. She just needed someone to believe in her and show her that learning can be fun. "And that's exactly why I want to make you an offer." Grace looked up, curious. "I'd like you to be Emma's official tutor, no longer the housekeeper, but her educator, with a salary and responsibilities that match your qualifications." "Mr. Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Emma needs you, and I believe you benefit from this relationship too." "More than you realize," Grace admitted. "After my accident, I thought I'd never work in education again. Emma gave me back the confidence that I can make a difference in a child's life. So it's settled. I accept, with great pleasure." Richard extended his hand, but Grace hugged him from her wheelchair. "Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I didn't know how." When Emma returned from swimming and heard her father's decision, she shrieked with joy and danced around the room. "Now Aunt Grace can teach me dance every day?" "Every day you want," Richard confirmed. "And can we put on shows for you?" "I'd love to watch." Grace and Emma exchanged a glance and smiled knowingly. "Then let's prepare a special surprise for Daddy," Emma said, clapping her hands. In the days that followed, Richard observed the new routine in the house. Grace arrived every morning at 8 and began with an hour of tutoring. After lunch, there was half an hour of dance, and in the late afternoon, free activities that could include painting, reading, or educational games. Emma was radiant. She woke up excited to learn and always had something new to tell her father at dinner. Her school grades kept improving, and she made new friends in class, including a girl who was also going through a tough time at home. Richard, in turn, started coming home earlier to watch some of the activities. He found that seeing Emma learn was more rewarding than any business meeting. 3 weeks after the change, Grace prepared the surprise performance she had promised. She turned the living room into a small theater, with chairs arranged for an audience of one. "Daddy, sit here and close your eyes," Emma instructed, leading Richard to the center seat. When he opened his eyes, he saw Emma in a pink tutu and Grace in an adapted ballet top. The music started, and the two began a choreography that blended classical ballet moves with creative adaptations for the wheelchair. Richard was moved by their perfect synchronization. Emma danced beside Grace, not like a child mimicking an adult, but like two seasoned dancers who had rehearsed together for years. At the end, they bowed in unison. Richard stood and applauded. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, his eyes glistening. "Aunt Grace made special steps just for us," Emma explained. "She said every dance becomes more beautiful when done with love." Richard looked at Grace, who was discreetly wiping away a tear. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." That night, after Emma went to sleep, Richard and Grace talked on the porch about future plans. "I've been thinking," said Richard, "maybe you could teach dance to other children too. I can adapt one of the rooms in the house to work as a small studio." "That would be amazing," Grace replied. "I've always dreamed of teaching again." "Then let's make it happen. Mr. Richard, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you change your mind about me? At first, you were clearly uncomfortable with me being here." Richard grew thoughtful for a few seconds. "I think I was afraid Emma would grow attached to you and then get hurt if something went wrong. I'll also admit it bothered me to see you do things for her that I couldn't. And now I understand I don't have to do everything alone. Emma can have many special people in her life, and that will only make her a richer person." Grace smiled. "She's a lucky girl to have a father who knows when he's wrong and can change. And I'm a lucky father to have found someone who loves my daughter as much as I do." 3 months later, the room that had once been used for storage had been transformed into a full dance studio. Grace taught classes 3 times a week to a group of 8 children, including Emma, and 2 others who also had special needs. Richard often watched the lessons from the doorway, amazed by Grace's patience and creativity. She had developed unique techniques to include every child, no matter their physical or cognitive limitations. Emma had become Grace's unofficial assistant, helping younger classmates and demonstrating steps for those who struggled. The girl had developed an impressive emotional maturity for her age. "Aunt Grace," Emma said one day after class, "do you think my mom is watching us dance?" "I'm sure she is, sweetheart, and I think she's very proud of the kind person you've become." "Do you think she would have liked you?" "I think any mother would be happy knowing her daughter has someone who loves and cares for her." "So you really love me?" "So much, Emma. You're like a daughter to me." Richard, who had overheard the conversation, felt his heart warm. Grace was no longer just an employee or a tutor. She had become part of the family. At the end of the school year, Emma's school organized a talent show where each child could showcase a special skill. Emma didn't hesitate to sign up for a dance performance with Grace. Richard invited the whole family to watch, his parents, his sister and her children, and even some co-workers who had become close friends. When it was Emma's turn, she took the stage with Grace. The auditorium fell silent as they saw the wheelchair, some out of curiosity, others out of prejudice. But when the music started and the two began their choreography, all murmurs ceased. The performance was indescribably beautiful. Emma danced with the technique of a far more experienced ballerina, while Grace turned every movement of the wheelchair into poetry. At the end, the entire audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Richard openly wept, not caring who saw. After the performance, several people approached Grace to praise her technique and ask about private lessons. One mother, in particular, pulled Richard aside. "Your employee is extraordinary," she said. "My daughter has Down syndrome and has always dreamed of dancing. Do you think she would agree to give lessons to my little girl?" "She's not my employee," Richard corrected. "She's my daughter's tutor and one of the most important people in our family. But I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you about lessons." That evening at the celebration dinner, Richard made a toast. "I want to thank 2 very special women," he said, raising his glass. "Emma, for teaching me that love has no limits and that we can always learn new things, and Grace for bringing joy back into our home and showing us that life's greatest treasures are priceless." "Daddy, can I make a toast too?" Emma asked. "Of course, sweetheart." Emma raised her juice glass. "I want to thank the best daddy in the world, who learned to love Aunt Grace as much as I do. And thank you, Aunt Grace, for teaching me that everyone is special in their own way." Grace dabbed her eyes with a napkin. "And I want to thank both of you for showing me that family isn't just about who you're born with, but who you choose to love." Richard looked around the table and realized how much his life had changed in the past few months. The house, once just a beautiful and quiet place, had become a home filled with laughter, music, and love. Emma was no longer the sad, lonely girl who kept to herself. She had grown into a confident, empathetic child full of dreams. And Grace wasn't just someone who needed a job anymore. She was a woman who had rediscovered her purpose and self-worth. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 6 months later, Richard had to travel abroad for work for the first time since Grace had started working with Emma. At first, he considered cancelling the trip, but Grace convinced him they'd be fine. Emma needs to see that she can trust people besides you, she argued, and I need to prove to myself that I can handle this responsibility. During the 2 weeks Richard was away, Grace and Emma grew even closer. Grace began staying overnight in the guest room Richard had specially prepared for her. Every evening, Richard received a call from Emma recounting the day's adventures. The little girl was doing well in school, had made new friends, and even helped a classmate struggling with math using the techniques Grace had taught her. "Daddy, I think I want to be a dance teacher when I grow up," Emma said during one of their calls. "Oh, and why's that?" "Because I want to teach other kids that everyone can dance just like Aunt Grace taught me." Richard smiled, proud of his daughter's kindness. When he returned, he found many positive changes. Emma had organized a small end-of-semester showcase with all of Grace's students. The dance room was decorated with the children's drawings, and there was even a small makeshift stage. "Daddy, you're just in time," Emma exclaimed, running to hug him. "Today's our special performance." Richard watched moved as 8 children, each with their own unique traits and challenges, danced together in perfect harmony. There were typical children, children with Down syndrome, a girl with hearing loss, and a boy who wore leg braces. Grace had choreographed a routine that highlighted each child's abilities, turning their differences into unique elements of the dance. At the end, they all joined hands in a circle, spinning to a song about friendship and acceptance. The parents in the audience were visibly touched. Many had arrived worried about how their children would be welcomed by the group, but now they saw all the kids playing and dancing together naturally. "Grace," Richard said after the performance, "you have no idea what a gift you've given these families." "Actually, they're the ones who gave me a gift," she replied. "They gave me back the certainty that I chose the right profession." That evening, after the guests had left, Richard, Emma, and Grace had dinner together, talking about plans to expand the dance classes. "I have an idea," Richard said. "What if we make this something bigger? We could rent our own space and create a truly inclusive dance school." "That would be amazing," Grace said, her eyes shining. "I've always dreamed of something like this." "And I can be Aunt Grace's lead assistant," Emma said excitedly. Richard smiled at their enthusiasm. "Then it's settled. We'll look for a suitable space next week." 2 months later, they opened Harmony Dance School in a spacious, fully adapted facility designed to welcome children with diverse needs. Grace was the pedagogical director, Richard handled the administrative side, and Emma remained the most dedicated assistant a school could ask for. The grand opening was an emotional event. Families of the students, some of Richard's colleagues, city representatives interested in the inclusion project, and even reporters from a local newspaper who had heard about the initiative all attended. During the opening ceremony, Richard gave a speech that summarized their journey. "A year ago, I was a man who thought I knew everything about life. I had business success, a beautiful home, and a wonderful daughter. But something was missing, something I couldn't name. Now I know what it was. Humility to learn and an open heart to love without prejudice." He gestured to Grace, who stood beside Emma on the makeshift stage. "Grace taught us that limitations only exist in our minds, that love doesn't see wheelchairs, social differences, or any other barriers we create. And Emma taught me that a 7-year-old can have more wisdom about human relationships than a 42-year-old adult." The audience applauded, moved. This school isn't just a business. It's a dream come true thanks to the meeting of special people who never stopped believing in the transformative power of art and love. Grace took the microphone, her hands trembling with emotion. "When I had my accident, I thought my life was over. For 2 years, I believed I had nothing left to offer the world. But Richard and Emma taught me that our greatest falls can lead to our greatest flights." She looked at Emma, who beamed back at her. "This wonderful girl gave me back the confidence that I can make a difference. And her father taught me it's never too late to start over, and that people can change when they open their hearts. Finally, Emma asked for the microphone. I just want to say I love you both so much, and this is the best family in the whole world. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. In the following months, Harmony Dance School became a benchmark for inclusive education in the city. They hosted visits from educators from other towns interested in replicating the model, and Grace was invited to give talks on adapted teaching methodologies. Richard discovered that running the school brought him far more fulfillment than managing the construction company. He began delegating more responsibilities in his other businesses to dedicate himself fully to the educational project. Emma, now 8, had grown into a mature and sensitive girl, always eager to help classmates who struggled. Her natural leadership made the other children seek her out to resolve small conflicts and mediate playtime. During the school's first anniversary, they organized a special event, a dance performance to be held at Lincoln Center. It would be the first time many of those children performed on a professional stage. The months of preparation were intense. Grace choreographed a piece that told the story of a garden where different flowers grew together, each contributing its unique beauty to form a harmonious whole. Richard immersed himself in every production detail: adapted costumes, special lighting, live music performed by a string quartet. He wanted it to be an unforgettable experience for the children and their families. Emma had a special role in the choreography. She was the gardener who tended to all the flowers, helping each one shine in its own way. On the night of the performance, the theater was packed. In addition to families, city officials, educators, healthcare professionals, and community members who had followed the project's growth were in attendance. When the curtains opened and the children appeared on stage, dressed as colorful flowers, the theater fell completely silent. The music began softly, and each child moved according to their abilities. The girl with Down syndrome was a sunflower, turning slowly, radiating joy. The boy with leg braces was a strong oak tree, swaying its branches in the wind. The child with hearing loss was a rose, dancing to the vibrations of the music they felt through the floor. And Grace, at the center of the stage, was Mother Earth, nurturing all the plants with her fluid, graceful movements in her wheelchair. For 15 minutes, the audience watched, mesmerized, one of the most beautiful displays of inclusion and art they had ever seen. Not a single person in the theater was unmoved. When the music ended and the children took their final bow, the ovation was thunderous. The crowd rose as one, applauding and cheering for several minutes. Richard, watching from the wings, openly wept. He couldn't believe the transformation he had undergone. 2 years ago, he had been uncomfortable seeing Emma dance with Grace. Now he was proudly watching the two of them lead a performance that would change many people's perceptions of inclusion and differences. After the show, there was a reception in the theater lobby. Many approached Richard, Grace, and Emma to congratulate them on the project. An elderly woman, whom Richard recognized as the grandmother of one of the students, spoke directly to Grace. "My dear," she said, holding Grace's hands, "you don't know the gift you've given my granddaughter. Before starting classes with you, she thought she was too different to have friends. Now she has more confidence than many adults I know." "The gift was mine," Grace replied. "Every child in this school has taught me something new about courage and determination." A man approached Richard. "I'm a reporter for the New York Times," he said. "I'd love to write a feature about you. This project deserves to be known across the country." "We'd be honored," Richard answered, "but the credit belongs entirely to Grace. She's the heart of this school." Grace shook her head. "That's not true. This was only possible because I found a family who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." Emma, who had been listening, chimed in with the wisdom only a child could offer. "Actually, the three of us are a team. Daddy handles the grown-up stuff, I help with the kids, and Aunt Grace teaches everyone to dance with their hearts." Everyone laughed at the simplicity and accuracy of Emma's explanation. That evening, when they finally arrived home after all the celebrations, the three of them sat on the porch to talk about the special day they had experienced. "I never imagined I'd one day be here with you both after a day like today," said Grace, still processing all the emotions. "And I never thought I'd find such a special family when I accepted the job as a cleaner in this house," she added. Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them there. You know, Grace, sometimes I think everything happened exactly as it was meant to. If I hadn't had those initial prejudices, maybe I wouldn't value what we have now so much. And if I hadn't had the accident, maybe I never would have developed this inclusive teaching method, Grace mused. Emma, sitting between them, swung her legs thoughtfully. Aunt Grace, do you still feel sad that you can't walk? The question, asked with the typical honesty of children, caught Grace by surprise. Sometimes I do, sweetheart. It's natural to miss things we've lost, but I've learned we can still be happy even when things don't go as planned. And how did you learn that? You and your father taught me. You showed me that what really matters isn't how we move through the world, but how we touch people's hearts. Richard was moved by her answer. Grace, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you have any family, siblings, parents? Grace was silent for a few moments. My parents passed away when I was young. I was raised by my grandmother, who died just before my accident. I have a brother who lives out in the country, but we grew apart after he got married. I think he felt uncomfortable with my situation. Richard felt a pang of sadness realizing Grace had faced all her hardships alone. Then we're your family now, Emma declared, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It's true, Richard agreed. You're as much a part of this family as any of us. Grace couldn't hold back her tears. Thank you. You don't know what this means to me. That night, Richard had trouble sleeping, not from worry, but from gratitude. He reflected on how his life had completely changed since that afternoon, when he caught Grace dancing with Emma. Back then, he saw it as a boundary being crossed. Now he realized it had been the beginning of the greatest transformation of his life. He had learned to look beyond appearances, to value people's character over their circumstances, and above all, he had learned that true love knows no barriers. Emma, who had once been a sad and lonely girl, had become a confident and empathetic child. And Grace had regained not only her sense of purpose, but also a family who loved her unconditionally. The next morning, Richard made a decision he had been considering for weeks. He sought Grace out after she arrived at the school. Grace, I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? I want you to become my official partner at the school, not just an employee or the educational director, but a 50% owner of the business. Grace was stunned. Richard, I can't accept that. You invested all the money, and you invested all your talent, dedication, and love. A dance school without a true educator is nothing. You're the heart of this project. But I don't have the money to buy a share. You don't need to buy it. You're earning it through your work. Consider it a way to recognize your real contribution to the success we've achieved. Grace fell silent for several minutes, processing the offer. Why are you doing this? Because it's fair, and because I want to make sure you never face financial hardship again. Emma and I depend on you, and you deserve security and recognition. Grace began to cry silently. I accept, but on one condition. What? When Emma turns 18, she'll inherit my share. I want her to have something solid, built with love, to start her adult life. Richard was moved by Grace's generosity. All right, but only if you promise to stay with us at least until then. I promise. You're my family now. When Emma learned of the decision, she celebrated as if it were her own birthday. Now Aunt Grace will never leave, she said, dancing around the room. 2 years passed. The Harmony Dance School had become a national benchmark for inclusive education. Educators from other countries visited to learn about the methodology Grace had developed. Emma, now 10, had grown into a mature and socially engaged preteen. She participated in the school's social projects and dreamed of becoming a specialist in special education. Richard had found the perfect balance between business and personal life. The construction company remained prosperous under the management of capable partners, while he devoted himself fully to the school and family. Grace had become one of the city's most respected educators, regularly giving lectures at universities and conferences, always accompanied by Emma, who became her official assistant at every presentation. During one of these lectures at the local state university, something unexpected happened. At the end of the presentation, a man approached Grace. Grace, is it really you? She looked up and immediately recognized him, her brother Robert, whom she hadn't seen in 5 years. "Robert, what are you doing here?" "I work at the university now. I'm a physical education professor. I saw your name on the lecture program and couldn't believe it." The two stared at each other in silence for a few seconds, carrying years of hurt and distance. "You look amazing," Robert finally said. "I've read about your work in the papers. I'm so proud." "Thank you," Grace replied, still processing the reunion. "Grace, I need to apologize for how I distanced myself after your accident. I was confused, didn't know how to help, and ended up being a coward." Emma, who had overheard the conversation, approached curiously. "Aunt Grace, who is this man?" "Emma, this is my brother Robert." "Robert, this is Emma, the daughter of my heart." Robert knelt to meet Emma's height. "Nice to meet you, Emma. Your aunt has always been very special, and it seems you've inherited that." "You're Aunt Grace's brother, but why don't you see each other?" Emma's direct question embarrassed Robert. "It's a complicated story, little one. Sometimes adults make mistakes and take too long to fix them. But it's never too late to apologize and start over," Emma said, repeating a phrase she'd heard from Grace countless times. Robert smiled and looked at his sister. "She's right. Grace, would you give me a chance to rebuild our friendship?" Grace hesitated for a few seconds, then extended her hand. "Of course, Robert. Family is family." That evening, during dinner, Grace told Richard about reuniting with her brother. "How do you feel about it?" Richard asked. "Confused, to be honest. On one hand, I'm happy he reached out. On the other, it still hurts to remember how abandoned I felt when I needed support the most. What does your heart say? That everyone deserves a second chance, and that I don't want to hold on to grudges anymore." Emma, listening to the conversation, offered her opinion. "Aunt Grace, you always teach me that forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt us. It's for ourselves. Maybe it's time to practice what you teach." Richard and Grace exchanged glances, impressed by Emma's maturity. "When did you get so wise?" Richard asked his daughter. "Ever since Aunt Grace came into our lives," Emma replied simply. In the following weeks, Grace and Robert began rebuilding their sibling relationship. He visited the school regularly and was impressed by the work she had developed. "Grace, I need to tell you something," Robert said during one of these visits. "What is it?" "After your accident, I didn't just stay away because I didn't know how to help. I stayed away because I felt guilty." "Guilty about what?" "Because you were the one driving that day because I had drunk too much at the party. If I hadn't, I would have been behind the wheel, and maybe—" Grace fell silent, processing this revelation. For years, she had thought her brother had distanced himself out of prejudice or discomfort with her new condition. "Robert, you can't blame yourself for an accident. It could have happened to anyone, in any situation. I know that logically, but it took my heart 5 years to accept it. And now you have? Seeing you here, happy, fulfilled, making a difference in so many people's lives. Now I understand that maybe it all happened for the right reason." Grace held her brother's hand. "Thank you for telling me this. Now I understand your distance better. Do you forgive me?" "I already have. In fact, I should thank you." "Thank me. If you hadn't stayed away, maybe I never would have developed the independence I needed to get where I am. Sometimes our biggest challenges lead us to our greatest triumphs." Robert smiled, his eyes glistening. "You've always been stronger than me." "Not stronger, just different. Everyone has their own way of handling difficulties." From that day on, Robert became a regular visitor at Richard's home. Emma immediately liked the uncle she had finally met, and Richard appreciated having another man to talk to about parenting and family. The Harmony Dance School continued to grow. They already had a waiting list of families eager to enroll their children, and plans to open a second location in another part of the city. During a meeting about the expansion, Richard had an idea. What if we asked Robert to be the physical education coordinator for the new location? "That would be amazing," Grace said. "He has so much knowledge about adaptive physical activities. And I could help train the other teachers," Emma suggested, always excited about new projects. When they proposed the idea to Robert, he was moved. Working with you all would be a dream come true, I accept immediately. In the following months, they worked together on developing the new location. Robert brought innovative ideas on integrating physical activities with dance, creating an even more comprehensive program for the children. The opening of the second location was an even bigger event than the first. State officials attended, along with representatives from international inclusive education organizations, and even television producers interested in making a documentary about the project. During his opening speech, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them there. 5 years ago, I was a man blinded by my own prejudices. I thought I knew everything about success, about family, about what truly matters in life. Today, I can say my greatest achievement wasn't building properties or accumulating wealth. My greatest achievement was learning to see with my heart. He pointed to Grace standing beside him on stage. This extraordinary woman didn't just transform my daughter's life. She transformed an entire community, showing us that our differences enrich us and that true love knows no barriers. Grace took the microphone, clearly emotional. When I first arrived at Richard's house, I was just a broken woman trying to rebuild my life. Today, I'm a partner in 2 thriving educational projects. I have a family that loves me unconditionally, and I've reunited with my brother. She looked at Emma, who smiled proudly from the front row. But the greatest gift I received was this wonderful girl who taught me that age has nothing to do with wisdom, and that children are often our best teachers about love and acceptance. Emma asked to speak too. I just want to say this story started with a misunderstanding, but ended with so much love. And everyone here today is proof that we should never give up on believing in people, even when they need time to change. The audience rose in a heartfelt standing ovation. After the ceremony, during the reception, many people approached the family to share how the project had impacted their lives. One mother, with tears in her eyes, told how her daughter with autism had become more communicative after starting dance classes. A father shared how his son, who used a prosthetic leg, had regained his self-esteem and made friends for the first time. "You didn't just save children," said one grandmother. "You saved entire families who were losing hope." Richard, Grace, and Emma listened to each testimony with hearts full of gratitude. They had started simply trying to resolve a personal matter and ended up creating something that touched hundreds of lives. That night, when they finally arrived home after all the celebrations, the 3 of them sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. "Do you think Mom Jennifer would be proud?" Emma asked, gazing at the stars. "I'm sure she would," Richard replied. "She always wanted you to grow up in an environment full of love and learning. And she'd be happy we found Aunt Grace," Emma added, "because now I have 2 mothers, one who gave me life and another who taught me how to live." Grace was moved by Emma's words. "And I have a daughter who taught me that family isn't just about blood, but about choosing to love every day." Richard looked at the 2 most important women in his life and realized he was living the happy ending he'd never imagined possible. "You know what I've learned these years," he said, "that life's greatest gifts come wrapped in ways we don't expect. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be a partner in a dance school, that my daughter would be an assistant to a wheelchair-bound ballerina, and that I'd be happier than I've ever been, I'd have said they were crazy. And if someone had told me I'd dance again and teach dozens of children, I'd have thought it impossible too," Grace said. "And if someone had told me I'd have a new uncle and 2 mothers who love me, I'd have been so happy," Emma added, making everyone laugh. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts and gratitude. "Aunt Grace," Emma said, breaking the silence. "Yes, sweetheart." "Tomorrow, can you teach me that new step you saw in the French ballerina's video?" "Of course, but now it's bedtime." "Just 5 more minutes?" Richard and Grace exchanged a glance and smiled. Some things never changed, and thank goodness for that. 5 minutes, Richard agreed, but just for tonight. Emma smiled victoriously and snuggled between them, staring at the stars as she planned all the adventures they still had ahead. And that was how a family was formed. Not by blood or work contracts, but by the daily choice to love, accept, and grow together. Richard learned that true wealth isn't measured in money but in moments like these. Grace discovered that starting over is possible at any age, as long as we have the courage to believe in ourselves. And Emma grew up knowing that true love knows no limits or barriers. The music that once separated them due to misunderstanding now brought them together in perfect harmony. And every night, when the house finally grew quiet, you could still hear the soft echo of laughter, conversations, and above all, so much love. The end. Now tell me, what did you think of this touching story? Did Richard overcome his prejudices and build a beautiful family with Grace and Emma? Leave a comment sharing if it moved you, and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.